Hi everyone, welcome back to This Book Belongs to Pam. In today's video, we are going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of January and February. I am combining these 2 months for a couple of reasons. One, I'm pretty late. And two, I actually didn't do a lot of reading for the first 2 months of the year. And there's a reason for that. Pretty much the entire January was me getting sick. And then in February, I was very busy because my sisters were visiting from the States, and also because I went to Boracay for one of my best friend's wedding, and that was a lot of fun, but it also meant being tired from the trip, and also a lot of like planning and meeting up and stuff, which didn't leave a lot of room for reading for me, and that's fine. If you hear that, that was my dog. In any case, I still want to be able to document all of the books that I've read, so I want to combine these 2 months. But before we do any sort of reflections on the books that I've read, I want to go through, as usual, my stats. I'm going to do like a comparison between both months. For the month of January, I read 4 books, and that is 1,540 pages and 1.18 hours. In comparison, in February, I read a total of 6 books, and that is 2,208 pages with 3.7 hours of audiobook listening. Like I said, didn't do a lot of reading, but I'm glad I was still able to squeeze in a couple of books and not completely fall off my reading habit. In terms of the types of books that I read, in January, I guess, I don't know what's going on, but in January, I was really reading dark books. So my moods were mysterious, dark, and tense. So I don't know why I started off the year with those books. Maybe because I was sick. So those were the types of books that I was gravitating towards. However, in February, I did a 180 turn and started reading emotional, lighthearted, and funny books. So I just really find that like fun to see the comparison between the 2 months. And lastly, let's look at my ratings. For January, my average rating is 3.63 stars. The highest was 4.25, while in February, my average was 3.42 stars, and the highest was 4.5. But now let's go into the actual books that I read in the month of January. The first book that I read, and the only physical book that I read for January, is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. This book was actually gifted to me by Pam from Pam Shenanigans. We did this book exchange last year. I will leave a link down below of both of our videos of that. It was really fun, and this was the book that she gifted to me out of that video. I really wanted to read it immediately because I was really curious. I initially thought that this was gonna be like a dark romance, but no, it is definitely not that. It is dark. There is a bit of romance, but it's not dark romance. At its core, it's definitely a historical mystery fiction. I have a hard time with genres. But yeah, I think that's how I would classify this. We are following Audrey Rose. She is, I guess, the protege of her uncle, who is this forensic scientist, essentially, before that term was probably invented. And she is really curious about forensics, about solving crimes based on autopsies and figuring out how people died, what's like the weapon that was used. So essentially like forensics. She's really interested in that. So she has been learning from her uncle despite the objections of her father, because she is obviously a woman of a certain class in society, and she's expected to just act as this lady and do all of the lady things that ladies of their time did. Everyone's saying that she's so good, she's very witty, she's very intelligent, and that is why her uncle could not resist really like teaching her what he knows. Obviously, we are following the events of Jack the Ripper. I'm actually not that well informed about Jack the Ripper, so I couldn't really speak to the historical accuracy of this. I did do some quick Google searches of some of the events that happened in this book, and a lot of them actually happened in real life, which is crazy if you think about it. I enjoyed this one. I like all of the like sleuthing that I did, although I do feel like there wasn't enough of the medicine, autopsy, forensic part of it. I thought there would be a lot of that just because that is what Audrey Rose is most passionate about. But I find that lacking in that department. This gave me the same vibe as Anatomy by Dana Schwartz with all of the, surgeries, autopsies, and, studying the body. If you liked Anatomy, you might actually enjoy this one. The only thing that I didn't really like about this book is Audrey Rose, our main character, as I mentioned earlier, has always been praised as this very intelligent, smart woman, and I did not find that to be true as I was reading. Like, she was missing a lot of this obvious clues, obvious like red flags. She didn't do a lot of like deductions. It was kind of off that everyone was saying that she's so intelligent, but then she wasn't really showcasing that a lot. So yeah, that was my main gripe with this book. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. I gave this 3.25 stars. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the books in the series as well. So yeah, that is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. The next book that I read is part of the 12 Rex 12 Friends challenge, and it is Dial A for Aunties by Jessie Q. Satanto. This book was recommended to me again by Pam. She has been raving about this book ever since I've known her, and I finally bit the bullet and read it for this challenge. I had a lot of fun with this. It was really tongue-in-cheek. It was very ridiculous. You really should not take this seriously at all. Do not even think about logic with this book because nothing makes sense. Just take it as it is and you will enjoy yourselves a lot more. I was so with this book primarily because while it was ridiculous, it wasn't like extremely funny for me. Some parts of it were the parts where all of the family members, like the four aunties and our main character, were interacting. That was quite funny and obviously a little bit relatable because of me being Asian as well. So I can relate to a lot of like the cultural implications and I guess societal pressure that Asians have from their elders. So I really resonated with that. Some of those I found like super relatable, super funny, but everything else was just like over the top ridiculous. And I feel like anything that could have happened in this book happened. And while that was like a wild ride, I don't particularly enjoy that type of anything goes storytelling. I would have wished for this to be a much tighter book, and I think the ending itself was a bit anticlimactic for me. But other than that, it was a good light read. I gave this one 3 stars. The third book that I read for January is arguably the darkest book that I've read so far this year, and that is Into the Wild by John Krakauer. This book was actually recommended to me by my sister because we were talking about Alaska for some reason, and she just told me that she remembered that this was a book that was part of like I guess recommended reading for her in high school, I think, and I found that it quite interesting, which is why I picked it up. In this book, we are being told the story of Chris McCandless. This is a biography by John Krakauer, by the way. So Chris McCandless is this guy, this young man from the East Coast. I think he's from Washington, D.C. I forget. But anyway, he was from the East Coast. He's from like a well-to-do family. After graduating from university, he decided to go off on this journey across United States, and eventually he ended up in Alaska. I guess the interesting thing about this story is that he actually essentially stripped away everything, like all the material things that he owned, his identity, money, everything. He left all of those behind and went on this, I don't know, soul searching, healing journey in Alaska. And the reason that this rose to, I guess, infamy is because his body was actually found by this bus, like abandoned bus in Alaska, where essentially bits and pieces of his life in Alaska for the last 3 months is very present. There is this theme of dark academia where you have this guy who pretty much has everything from a material and privilege standpoint. He read this book by Jack London about the wilderness of Alaska. It's a book that romanticizes Alaska as this place where nature is very much the greatest like teacher, where the best way to experience life is just by succumbing to nature essentially, and just, getting food from nature, being self-sustaining and things like that. Like, he was very much enamored by this book, and he decided to experience it for himself. But he did a lot of like things, like he went around all over US and he met a lot of people, and actually most of this biography has been built with the interviews of the people that he have met along the way, and he seemed to have like made such a good impression, or at least a lasting impression, on the people that he have met. So everyone just had a lot of different things to say. Like, it was just a very, I guess, captivating story, just because of how crazy it seemed. This wouldn't really, I think, happen in modern day US. At the time, social media did not exist, the internet wasn't really that accessible to everyone, and just life was generally less fast paced and connected. So it was a lot easier to, I guess, hide yourself in a way and disconnect from the world. But yeah, this was just, it's really hard to encapsulate this book in like a couple of minutes, just because a lot of things happen. I would recommend this book, provided that you're okay with any of the trigger warnings, because it is quite a dark book. It is very thought-provoking. It speaks to how we tend to romanticize a lot of things in our life, and also the privilege of white males, and how they're able to go about life in the way that he did. It also shines a light on human relationships, like real in-person social interactions, and how that could leave like a lasting impression. It talks about legacies. There's just a lot in here, and I understand why this could be like a required reading. I gave this book 4.25 stars. I found it really compelling and really reflective, and I guess I was in the mood for that in January. So yeah, that is Into the Wild by John Krakauer. Continuing on with the dark themes, I read None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. I think this is pretty much like a new release. Maybe last year, like late last year, I know that this was like going the rounds in BookTube and Bookstagram. And I've been wanting to try one of Lisa Jewell's thrillers. So I picked this one up and I was pleasantly surprised. None of This Is True is following these two women who are birthday twins, which means that they were just born on the exact same day, and they meet at this bar when they were celebrating their birthdays. And one of the women, I believe her name is Alex, she is, I guess, very successful. She has this podcast where she talks about successful women. She essentially gives off the impression that she is like, she's set, she's put together, she has money, she has family, she has ambitions, she has her goals, and just like the embodiment of someone who has it all together. I forget the name of the other girl. But essentially, this girl is someone who feels like they haven't really done much in their lives. They are working in a job that doesn't really fulfill them. They are married to someone who is very much older than they are. So there's like a lot of disconnect in terms of how they handle things and their interests. And also, she seems to be having a lot of problems with her kids and just having like difficulty with family life. One day they meet at that bar, and essentially they build this sort of I guess friendship, where Alex is going to be producing a podcast based on this girl. I guess talking about her trying to come out of her shell and figure out what she wants out of life, and like really going for it. Kind of like a, I guess, follow me along this journey of glowing up kind of podcast. And through the course of that podcast, we learn about a lot of things about her life and the things that happened to her, the things that she did. So we kind of get this very eerie feeling about her, because she's starting to like reveal some thoughts and information that might be a bit questionable and might make you scratch your head. She's venting a lot about her husband, the things that happened with her kids, all of the misfortunes that was placed in her life. But then you start to think that as time goes along, that things aren't really adding up. And true to the title of the book, none of this is true. You start to like doubt if anything is true, because the way that this story is told is we are following different POVs of Alex and this other girl, but we also have a glimpse into a Netflix documentary featuring the behind the scenes of the creation of the podcast. So that's like a lot of layers. So it's the future. And we find out that there was a lot of like shady things that happened. There were deaths that happened during the production of that podcast. Essentially, we are trying to figure out the who, what, when, where, how of it. So I really enjoyed the storytelling format of this. I was really hooked by this book. Like I was at the edge of my seat the entire time. The only reason why I hesitate to give this a 5 star was because of some of the themes that were in the book. Very sensitive. I did not particularly like how it was handled. I did not particularly agree with some of the choices there, but in the grand scheme of things, it was a really good book, and I do recommend it if you want a really fast-paced thriller where the storytelling is not linear at all. So yeah, I gave this 4 stars. That is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell, and that is the last book that I read for January. Moving on to the month of February, I think I was still in dark mood at the beginning of the month because the next book that I read is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This book, oh my gosh, I don't know how to start talking about this book because this book put me through it. Like, it really put me through several emotions, and I'm pretty sure yes, I did a vlog on it in my realistic week of reading vlogs. I will link that down below. But yeah, I felt a lot of emotions while I was reading this book. If you're not familiar, Beartown is a series, but this is the first book, and it talks about this place called Beartown and hockey. It is a book about hockey, but it's not like the hockey romance that's super popular right now. But it just talks about this small town who is obsessed with hockey in a way that it's pretty much their identity. Like, hockey is the identity of Beartown. And with that comes this different perspective on how this obsession and identification with hockey has affected their way of living. It has affected their decisions in life, how they treat other people. One day, an incident happened. Essentially, a crime was committed. One of the superstar hockey players for Beartown Hockey Club committed rape against another person. We are going to be following, I guess, the aftermath of that event, which sides people took, how people treated the victim, how people treated the perpetrator, how justice was served or not served, and how socially it has affected every single person in this town. What I really enjoyed about this book, and this is, I think, pretty much like a classic Frederick Bachman style of writing where we are following a whole cast of characters. I think we had a POV from every single person in this town. Obviously, that's not true, but like we had like what, 15 or more people. We are not really following, but we get a glimpse of the events through their eyes. And it is told in sort of like vignettes. We get a bit of this person's POV and then a bit of this person's POV. So it's not a very linear storytelling technique, although there is like an overarching plot to the whole thing, but the way that the story is told and the way that we get to know the characters are not very linear. And it was really interesting to me. It is the same writing style as Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. So if you liked Anxious People, I'm sure you will love Beartown, although it is quite dark, so please do check the trigger warnings. I felt really happy while reading this book. I felt really sad. I felt really angry. I felt really frustrated. There were so many emotions that I felt while reading this book. And I think Frederick Bachman did such a great job at illustrating and showcasing those emotions through the different peoples. And it's also interesting how hockey has really affected people's way of life, and it's not as frivolous as it seems. It's not just about people obsessed over a sport. It's really how hockey is embedded in their way of living, in their identity, in their livelihood, in essentially their opportunities to advance in life. So it's not just hockey as a sport, it's hockey as an economic driver, it's hockey as a way that for people to connect and come together as a way of belonging to something bigger. It's hockey as a way of leaving a legacy. So it's not really not just like hockey as a sport, which I really enjoyed how Bachman explored that theme, and I find that it can be applied to so many different stories, especially in small towns like Beartown, which can be, quite set in their ways, quite traditional. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this book, but it is not a happy book. I gave this one 4.5 stars. The only reason why I didn't give it 5 stars is intrinsic to how Bachman writes. Bachman likes to put a lot of truisms in his writing, like, phrases that you would see in like coffee mugs or in t-shirts or in tote bags. And I don't mind that, but if it's in every single vignette, it can get quite tiring, quite overused, and that is why I couldn't give it a 5 stars. But other than that, it was so good. I highly recommend it. I'm excited to read further into the series, and I know this is just gonna be like heartbreaking. But yeah, that is Bear Down by Frederick Bachman. The next book that I read is All the Lonely People by Kanika Claudine D. Peña. So this is by a Filipino author, and this is also published locally, which I really want to be able to do a lot more reading from Filipino authors, especially ones who are published locally, just because I feel like that's something that we need to really support as Filipino booktubers. And I'm really glad that I picked this one up. This was also part of that realistic week of reading vlog. I don't know why I picked up so many sad books, but the way that I would describe this book is that it's a collection of short stories of people and the things that they have lost, and how those seemingly like trivial things are actually like a symbol of something bigger, and essentially what it feels like to be in a big city filled with so many people but still feel lonely. So All the Lonely People. I think because it was really relatable. In a nutshell, I think this story just tackles a lot of the things that we all feel but struggle to really process. Things like belonging somewhere, things like wanting to make more out of your life but being constrained by your economic standing, and like wanting to connect with people but not really knowing how, feeling lost in a city that is so fast paced and is filled with so many people all going about their own ways, feeling like left behind in life. And I think this perfectly encapsulated those feelings in six, I believe, yeah, 6 short stories. There is an overarching like theme in here as well. I really liked how the short stories were handled. It's not 6 individual stories, but more of like 6 interconnected stories. I like how she transitioned from one story to another. The author would do this thing where, let's say, one person that we're following alights from a bus, and she saw someone running in the distance. And then we realized that that person running in the distance is actually the person in the next story. So I like how everything is just connected in very subtle ways. And it just helped the stories flow together. It helped the story feel like a lot bigger than just one story. It really showed how a lot of things are interconnected, even though we don't know it. I don't know how you would get this internationally, but for people in the Philippines, it's easy to get from the publisher, from our local bookstores. I gave this one 3.5 stars. That is All the Lonely People by Kanika Claudine D. Peña. The next 4 books that I read as part of this big project that I've been working on for the past 2 months, which is reading 7 books in 7 romance subgenres. So I have already posted that video. I will leave a link down in the description box. So if you want to see my, I guess, in the moment feelings and in-depth thoughts on these books, you can go to that vlog. I will do like broad strokes commentary here, just so I'm not like super repeating myself. But yeah. Next book is Funny You Should Ask by Elissa Sussman. This book is a contemporary romance novel. We are following this interviewer, and she did this celebrity profile, which shot to like infamy, and 10 years later she's doing another interview of that same celebrity, and people are like clamoring for them to recreate what happened during the first interview, because in the first interview 10 years prior, things got a little bit out of hand, and in the profile that she did 10 years ago, she wrote all of that. Now everyone's just like saying, they wanted more information of what happened 10 years ago. Did anything happen between them? Because there was like this tension that everyone can feel. And yeah, that was like the premise of the whole thing. And we're just essentially discovering what actually happened 10 years ago and what does that mean for these two people. I gave this one 2.75 stars. I really enjoyed the premise of it. It was so interesting, and I guess it's like peak self-insert kind of story where we could only imagine ourselves in her position, like having that kind of experience with the celebrity that she's interviewing. So it has that potential to be this really cathartic experience, but I felt like it fell flat in the delivery of it. While I was reading this book, I was constantly like rolling my eyes about how the narrator of this story kept saying that the profile that she wrote was so good, that everyone was loving it, that it launched her career, and everyone just wanted her to do their celebrity profiles. But then we get to read that actual profile that she wrote 10 years ago, and it is not good. It was so basic. It felt like a high school girl writing about it in her secret live journal blog or something like that. One thing that I realized as I was reading this was that it felt very familiar, and that's because it was reminiscent of the 2011 GQ profile of Chris Evans. I also said this in the vlog that I did, but that interview was essentially the source material for this book. And honestly, that interview was written a lot better than this book. So you could just read that if you want the story like this. And that actually happened in real life. So yeah, that is Funny You Should Ask by Alyssa Sussman. The next book that I read is the last book in this very big series that I've been reading for the past couple of months, and that is The Dare by L. Kennedy. This is the fourth book in the Briar U series, which is, I guess, the second half of this big off-campus Briar U universe that L. Kennedy has written. So this is the ninth book, essentially, in this universe. And I gave this one 2.5 stars. I didn't really enjoy it much. I think it's really just down to the fact that I've read so many of this book and I'm bored of it. I'm bored of the concept. I'm bored of the tension between our main characters. I'm bored of the third act conflict. It's just like it has been done. Obviously, like a lot of books follow the same formula, but because I've been reading this hockey romance series for the past couple of months, it felt quite repetitive for me, and I felt like the characters for this book were just a rehash of the characters from the first four books, which were the strongest books in my opinion. I do still recommend this hockey series by Al Kennedy, but maybe don't read them back to back, or maybe just read the first 4 or 5 books, because really that's, I think, the best books in this series. So yeah, that is The Dare by L. Kennedy. The second to the last book that I read for the month of February is Butcher and Blackbird by Breen Weaver. Now, this book took me by surprise. I did not expect to love it as much as I did. This is a dark romantic comedy, which is a very unique genre in my opinion. I don't think I've seen another book that has the same genre. If you know of any, please leave in the comments down below because I really want to read more from this genre. In this book, we're following two, I guess they're kind of like Robin Hood type of serial killers. They're serial killers who kill evil people, essentially like serial killers as well. They're like the good serial killers, if you will. They're taking justice in their own hands. They have this very weird meet cute.
Is it even cute if there's like maggots and decaying bodies involved?
Anyway, they meet, and we found out very early on that Rowan, the guy, is head over heels attracted to Misery, which is the girl. And they. No, it's not Misery. That's a different book. Hold on. We find out very early on in this book that Rowan, the guy, is pretty much head over heels attracted to Sloane, the girl. And they create this game between themselves. Once a year, they will race to get to the serial killer, and I guess who kills that serial killer first wins. They're just very competitive, and they really take pride in their craft. So they do that, and obviously feelings and relationship develop throughout the course of those games. So I really love how funny this book was. Like it's funny not because of like super witty banter or things like that, but because of the way that they talk about this gruesome, explicit things. Like they would talk about gouging eyeballs or I don't know, maggots crawling out of a body like orzo pasta or like all of these very icky and disgusting things in a very lighthearted manner. And that made it quite funny to me. The only thing that was quite lacking for me is the actual serial killing aspect. Like they did touch a bit of like the cases that they were solving, but it didn't really go into much detail. I didn't get that feeling of figuring out who the killer was, trying to chase the killer and finishing the job, right? It really glossed over that and focused a lot on relationships, especially towards like the middle to the end part. I felt like a lot of it could have been more exciting, more action packed. But overall, I really enjoyed the romance in this one. I was really like giggling in a lot of the scenes. I like the fact that there's dual POV, so you also get to see things from Sloane's perspective, from Rowan's perspective, and how differently they view the same incident, the same experience. And that was just really, really cute to see, especially because, you know, we all know that Rowan is a simp for Sloane. So that's always kind of cute. I gave this one 4 stars, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the books in the series. Yeah, that is Witcher and Blackbird by Breen Weaver. The last book that I read, which is probably the most lighthearted book of the entire January and February, and that is none other than Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare. This was my first ever Tessa Dare book, and I was really pleasantly surprised by how beautiful the writing was. Like, I didn't expect it to be so lyrical, especially like this part right here where she was talking about how this house had this certain character and how it felt like the house might actually consume her. And I don't know, I just found it quite gothic-y, but at the same time, like quite beautiful. So yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised by the writing, and it made me a lot more excited to read more Tessa Dare. As for the actual plot, we're following this girl who is the daughter of a very famous author of these children's stories. And everyone just really loves these children's stories, these fairy tales that her father has written. But something happened, her father died, and she didn't really get any of her inheritance. So she was essentially poor. At one day, she receives a letter that apparently she has inherited this castle. So she goes off to that castle and finds out that it's a very dilapidated, scary castle that needs a lot of work, but she was happy to do the job because she really needed a place to stay. However, she did not count on the fact that there was someone living in the castle, the Duke. And this Duke apparently was the original owner of the castle, and he has been hiding out in the castle. We are essentially trying to figure out what to do at this point. Like, is she gonna stay in the castle? Is he gonna leave the castle? Are they gonna live together? Lots of that. Cute. There's a lot of like witty banter. I gave this one 3.25 stars because of, again, there's like a lot of sensitive themes here with our main character actually having a lot of like insecurities about her physical appearance, and I felt like sometimes it was towing the line between very stereotypical, but also sometimes it felt very like good representation. So I think it just needs a little bit more work in that department. It wasn't offensive, really, I don't think. There was just moments where I kind of scratched my head about how things were presented. But yeah, overall, it was a really fun time. It's a very lighthearted read, and I would still recommend it. And yeah, that is Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare. There you have it. Those are the books that I read in January and February. I think I did a pretty good job at selecting books. I was really intrigued by most of the books that I've read, and there were like a couple of solid gems in there. I think it was a good reading period for me, and I hope the same for you. If you have read any of the books that I've read in this wrap up, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts on these books. If you have any recommendations for some of the books that I've enjoyed, let me know in the comments as well. And yeah, that is it. I will see you in the next video. Bye!